All right, well, great crowd. Thanks for all coming out. So what we're going to talk about today is a survey of unique identifiers in New York City Open Data. And we're going to go through how those unique IDs kind of join together so you can get a picture of the sort of wealth of data New York City produces and how it pieces together, how that impacts operations, how that impacts different agencies and their work. And then we'll go through what I'm calling some sorrows and surprises in those data sets where it's a lot more complicated than it looks at first glance. And so I'm Jonathan Pichot. I work for New York City Planning. Cindy here works for the Department of Buildings. She's going to help me out, particularly around building data. So what we're going to cover is the borough block lot, the BBL, the bin, addresses, and street segment IDs. And that's a lot to cover in an hour. So this is really to give you a sense, a broader sense. But for me to understand the technical and knowledge in the room, how many of you know what a BBL is? All right, okay. So we're pretty, and bins. Okay, all right. Well, so some of this stuff I might go a little faster. It seems like there's a good knowledge in the room. And then I'm going to talk about some data tools that already exist. Some of you may already know, like Zola and others. A lot of you know BBL, so I'm pretty sure along the way. But given the time constraints, we'll see. But what I'm going to actually start with is a history, very brief, and we're going to talk about BBLs. It's actually the Land Ordinance Survey of 1785, which was Thomas Jefferson's plan to sort of make sense of the West. As the United States was growing, the West at this point was the Midwest and up Mississippi. And he spread out this sort of block design all throughout, basically from the eastern seaboard through the rest of the country. And it was a system of sort of massive, I think it was 640 by square acres, that could then be split and split again and split again. And if any of you grew up in the West, I grew up in Michigan in the Midwest, this design pattern was very, very common throughout that whole, the whole region. And so you think about this in the context of New York City. So there's actually a fantastic Instagram that follows the Jefferson grid if you're interested. So New York City had developed at the tip of Manhattan in a more ad hoc way, similar to the way the Dutch and the English would build their cities. But then in 1811 there was what's called a Commissioner's Plan, which is basically the definition of the famous grid of New York City that spread from about 14th Street northward. And the reason I'm trying to give you this context is to think about the block and lot is actually a pretty old identifier. It's something that existed from a long time ago. So in 1860s, these are maps of the blocks in New York City, the lots. We haven't necessarily numbered them yet. We've got the addressing system here. But you can already see, and this is in open data, in actually the digital tax maps, you can start to see hand-drawn, handwritten documentation of the block and the lot numbers. This is actually the block and lot number of the Empire State Building. But you have all this old documentation where we were already documenting and numbering all of this, this built environment. You can see this in paper tax maps where you have the block and the lot number. And then eventually it was digitized, I think it was not that long ago. I think it was like 2008 where they fully digitized these tax maps. Now it exists on the digital tax map. So why all this trouble?
Tell the Department of Finance.
Department of Finance, I'm sorry. The DOF, Department of Finance, digital tax map. So why all this trouble? This was for the legal legibility of the state. So you go back to Jefferson and everyone else, and there's always been the state's effort to understand its ownership, like what is on the ground. And that's actually a lot of what we're going to encounter is always this effort to understand through data what actually is the reality on the ground. But that is a problem that will maybe never be solved. We're always going to try to get to the reality. So to always in the back of your mind realize that data is an approximation of what that reality is on the ground. And this was all for taxes, right? It tends to always go back to money. So the lots was so that we could levy taxes on ownership. So now to today, what we call the BBL, which stands for Borough Block Lot, and it's assigned to these tax lots for the purpose of assessment and taxation. And now we're going to start to get into the caveats of the BBL itself. So many of you maybe heard of Matt Pluto, user. So Pluto is only a subset of actually all of the lots that New York City and the Department of Finance recognizes. Because there's actually 3, and actually a 4th, which it gets even more complicated, we'll come to, but 3 that I want to talk about right now, called a base BBL, a billing BBL, and a unit BBL. And this comes into play when we talk about the complexities of New York's housing market, where we have condos, where we have ownership that's separated, and the levy of taxes is more complicated than the actual ground on which a building sits. Pluto is mostly base BBLs, some billing BBLs. I'll get to that in a moment, not unit BBLs. And the BBL as an identifier.
What is Pluto?
Oh, okay. Pluto is a fundamental data set produced by New York City Planning. I'll get to it in just a second, more in detail. But the BBL as an identifier is managed by the Department of Finance, but it's pulled in by other departments for other purposes. What the BBL looks like, just if you're a developer type, a technical type, there are many different ways you might end up seeing BBL. In general, the BBL is a 10-byte integer that is padded by zeros. So the borough sits in the front, 1 through 5, 1 Manhattan, 5 Staten Island, 5 identifiers for the block, 4 bytes for the lot. You'll see it in different forms. Sometimes they have like a slash. Sometimes you'll drop the zeros. And actually some planners know the BBL in their mind as more of just the block and lot in this form and not in a more sort of database-oriented form. So there's sometimes sort of not misunderstandings, but we have to understand what you're talking about. And so if you know the app Zola, which is a labs app, we use the simplified identifier to get to a certain lot. So, to answer your question, 2 of the fundamental data sets that you can find in Open Data that use the BBL are the digital tax map, as I mentioned before, and you can use it online and see it as a tool, as well as download the whole thing. Here in my presentation, if I have a little globe next to the dataset name, it means a geodata set. You'll see some others that are just tabular that you have to join. And then Map Pluto, which we have a tool called Zola that shows Map Pluto. So those are the 2 data sets. But as I mentioned, Map Pluto is actually a subset of the BBLs that exist in the digital tax map. And I'll show you how that is the case. So let's look at a BBL surprise. In red here, and this should be red, is 308007751. That is the billing BBL for this lot, and this is what you would see in Map Pluto. You wouldn't see the rest of it, you would just see this massive block. And what this is, if you can see the underlying sort of Google map, is a large, actually 2 buildings here. In yellow, or orange-ish, is the digital tax map of the base BBLs. So these orange numbers here are 8 base BBLs, those representing more of like what a contiguous building might be. So these sliced apart are, there's basically no walkway between these buildings. They're like, and you'll see it when I show you this last Google Street View. These buildings are actually 3-story condos. And each of those, each floor of each base BBL also has a BBL because it's a condo that needs to be assessed and needs to be taxed. So that's sort of this interlocking of a billing, a base BBL, sort of a base of a building, and a unit BBL. All this, and this is again a generalist introduction, is to make you realize that when you start to see BBLs in open data, you need to understand what data set that's coming from, and that you may not find it in another data set that's referencing BBLs, particularly between the tax map and Map Pluto. So, to review, base BBLs covers most cases, single standing building with a single owner. A billing BBL usually represents a legal entity, so in this last case, that billing BBL was a condo association, of which there were separate buildings, of which there were separate units. And so the unit BBL represents a certain tax liability. Okay, let's talk about another surprise. This little neighborhood here, called Marblehead, yes sir?
Is it possible to actually identify co-op based on BBL?
I didn't hear that.
Is it possible to identify a co-op?
A co-op unit.
Yeah, by BBL.
It is, I wish I was an expert in all this. I think there's a way in which it will respond. So if you ask for like our geocoder for a certain address, it'll respond saying whether it is some sort of cooperative. And you could probably query PAD, and I can talk about that, we'll talk about that a little bit. So I think that's correct. I think you could look for co-op. Someone else in the room might actually know the answer. I'm pretty sure you can. Let's talk about the surprise. So another surprise in BBLs is this neighborhood called Marble Hill in the Bronx. And it's a particular little configuration there, right on the southern tip. But in fact, Marble Hill used to be part of the island of Manhattan. And at one point, they actually dredged the river to sort of cut off this section of Manhattan so that boats could come through, and eventually actually filled in the river to the north of it. But remember, going back, the BBL is an older 19th century identifier. Marble Hill, in the BBL, the borough code, is actually part of Manhattan. It has a borough, so it's going to have the one in the front of the BBL. Now this gets really confusing because Marble Hill has, for most of its services, integrated and is considered part of the Bronx. If you're talking about schools, if you're talking about fire service, if you're talking about all sorts of other things. But legally, its voting actually votes for a Manhattan council person, and in our data set, continues to be identified as part of Manhattan. So now we've got BBLs that say it's part of Manhattan, it's not really part of Manhattan. Things get more complicated. Another BBL sorrow, and this goes back to your question about co-ops, is, as I mentioned before, a billing BBL represents sort of or a base BBL, billing BBL represents sort of a legal entity that might own like a large cooperative. Well, if you're familiar with New York and Breezy Point is actually one massive co-op. So you can see all of these building footprints in just this one BBL. This was an interesting challenge during Hurricane Sandy, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So this, obviously, the BBL, older identifier, but had its limitations. And we had to sort of improve it, or at least figure out a way to start to identify at a more granular level and help us manage this even better. So the solution to that was the BIN. The BIN stands for the Building Identification Number. And this is Breezy Point, but now with bins on it. So now we're actually having like actual individual footprints. We have an identifier now for an individual building. And the bin is helpful for other cases. So for example, institutions like Columbia University, which is one legal entity, it owns all this land, wide, one BBL, but obviously there are many buildings there that might need to have codes checked and like might need to, if FDNY needs to show up, what building are they talking about? So the BIN was created in the 1990s as a way to identify buildings with multiple addresses and basically to have a subset of a BBL, right? So a bin, or in a BBL, can be one or more bins. And it was assigned to buildings and eventually other structures, which we'll talk about. It was created before visual GIS. So in fact, it was still at a time where we had BBLs in massive databases. We had address points, and we started to actually merge together these address points and say these 4 addresses are in fact the same building. Because what was happening was, I might have like Department of Buildings or whomever who needs to review might be sent to 3 addresses in the same building. Because as New York City, we know the complexities of our buildings is such that it's really hard to say with certainty that one address is one specific building. So, bins today are mostly generated by NYC FAM, and I'll get into what I mean by that, but it's fundamental to the work of the Department of Buildings. And it looks like this. It's a 7-byte integer, where that classic borough code is on the front, and then it has 6 digits in the back, 0 padded for the building ID. So like Bronx, number 2, Brooklyn is 3, Queens is 4, Staten Island is 5. Where you're going to find bins is one of the fundamental data sets for bins are building footprints, which are published by DoIT. And that's where DoIT, we have a biannual, or is it biannual? every 2 years. However you say that. Scan, like high definition photographic scan of the city, and we highlight, sort of draw the building footprints from that. The bins, when they are sort of like considered a real building, meaning they have an address, they've been built, they're good to go, they're added into what's called PAD, the property address directory, by New York City City Planning, and that's when they end up in New York City's geocoding system. There are many different ways to access that. It's called GeoSupport. One really easy way is GOAT, which we'll show a little bit, just to give you an idea of how these bits of information connect. And then in DOB's work, the open data set called DOB Job Application Filings, which is really the work of like this fundamental work of giving someone a permit to build something, confirming that that thing can be lived in, checking to make sure they're in compliance, and then eventually, when the building might be demolished, removing that and saying that it was demolished. So, how is a bin born? So we're going to talk a little bit about the process. A bin is created when a building permit is filed with DOB. That bin may be created on DOB's end, or DOB might check with DCP and say, hey, give me an identifier that doesn't exist yet. That goes into paperwork. That becomes what we call a T-bin. So it's not yet have an address, right? It's not yet a building that exists physically, perhaps. But then when DOB issues what's called a certificate of occupancy, where it says this building passes code, people can be in it, they tell city planning, sorry for the city acronyms, it's just the DCP, the city planning, Department of Buildings, we add that bin to our property address data directory, which ends up in our geocoding software. And if you see a lot of open data, you're going to see a lot of the BBLs and bins, and those are usually coming, if they're like, let's say, DO, Department of Education's data, those are coming from the PAD, because what Department of Education is doing is they're generally running their data set through our geocoder and getting all of these identifiers from our geocoder. So it tends to come full circle in a lot of the open data you see. And then do it with that planimetric, the sort of photography, the aerial photography I mentioned, adds a building footprint for that building. What happens when a building or a bin is retired? So demolition permits are filed with the Department of Buildings. When DOB confirms that in fact that building is demolished, we remove the bin, and then do it removes building footprint. But of course, there were buildings before the 1990s, right? That's the functioning of the new construction and new demolition. But how do we catch up? We have a team that does extraordinary work called Geographic Research and City Planning. It's a team of 9, and what they basically do is research the ground reality of New York City and is constantly trying to keep up and update these data sets with what buildings exist in the city. And it can get really complicated. So let me show you an example of what they do. Is this building one building? Is it 4 buildings? 5 buildings? They have to go and look and understand where firewalls are, where entrances and exits are. Is there a way in which I can walk from this apartment to that apartment? What about are there utilities that are in each separate building? Fire escapes, building heights, all of this stuff, which they do both from the digital data that we can get from Street View and other things to actually going on the ground and figuring that out. But this is a constant battle, because as I mentioned, the first pass of this data was created before we had visual GIS. We were like, we think these addresses are building, we think. But the metabolism of New York City, the change is immense, that it's basically a project that may not, that will always be something we need to be doing and trying to keep up with. And what a bin has grown as the city has realized its utility. So it's not only what we might think of in New York as a building, like, for example, these condos, it's warehouses, it's actually structures without roof, it's garages, it's bathrooms in a park, it's greenhouses, it's bleachers, Statue of Liberty has a bin. Pools have been, so things that even go underground, but still considered a structure. Temporary units that are less than, that are there for a few years, school rooms and other kinds of uses. Subway stations that are underground, malls that are underground, subway entrances that might be on the right of way, bridges, skywalks, overhead infrastructure like overhead train lines. The High Line has a bin.
Wow.
And now you start to realize the High Line, right, is going to go over hundreds of BBLs. That's another challenge, and this is when I get to introduce to you the fourth type of BBL. So because the data model assumes that a bin has a BBL, but some bins are going to cross more than one BBL or be underground, in which we don't really, I'm not even sure how the tax works there. We have to create what are called pseudo BBLs. So this is what looks like sort of a work shed in the median that doesn't have, so basically we're just in like the right of way. We don't have a lot here. If you open up, this is the building footprints data by doing. You can see that it's there, and it has a bin up here. Actually, bin. Yeah, that's a bin. And then we have a BBL of 100415999. So it's just like nines out the rest. You're not going to find a BBL. Yes, sir.
But are bins reused?
That's a complicated question.
I'll pass it to Cindy. Yeah.
I'm happy to talk to you later if we have time after the presentation.
So you're not going to find it says it's base BBL, Pluto. You're actually not going to find that in Pluto because it's not an actual billable tax lot. It's just a BBL that we have to generate for the data model to function. And you're going to see that in other sort of more complicated bins that you might find. Another sorrow, and this is me going back to the work of geographic research, is that we don't have 100% coverage. This is back to Breezy Point, and you'll see a few buildings here. The underlying satellite imagery here is Google. You'll see a few buildings that are missing. This is particularly because of Hurricane Sandy, where buildings were decommissioned as non-existing anymore. So the bin was removed, they were rebuilt. We haven't yet gotten to adding them to building footprints and that data set. And around Hurricane Sandy, this was also a really big opportunity to help clean up a lot of the bins around those regions that were hit. Because as I mentioned, we didn't have 100% coverage then. We still don't. We got a lot better afterwards. But it's this ongoing process. Okay, what are we on time? Okay. So, I've talked about BBLs, talked about bins, but the more common identifier that I think we're all familiar with, that anybody would be, is the address. And the address sounds simple, but in New York City, nothing is. So this is on Dugal Street, north of NYU. We've got Stumptown here, and another number 180, 178 on McDougal. Just to remember that. I want to give you a little context of the neighborhood. So here we're pulled out a bit. This is our 178, 180. Here we have the entrance to the coffee shop. Let's go back a little more. So we're on McDougal Street, but it also has another name. We have friendly people, and here it says 30 West 8th Street. Okay, so that's the address of the entrance if you want to walk into Stumptown. Give you again a little context, West 8th, okay, McDougal. All right, so that's the point we're talking about. So let's look at the data. So what you're seeing here in blue are the bins, and then you have DoIT's address point data. So there's another data set you can access on those data, and really it's generally the addresses in which there might be an entrance. So we see 182, we see 30 West 8th Street, but we don't actually see 180, which, if you remember, was here. 180. Okay. Well, where are these addresses coming from? How does that work? So there's this New York City address points data set, which you can get from Open Data. There's actually fantastic metadata on all of DoIT's data sets and even others. It's just as metadata. I was going to link to things I don't think I have time. And then the property address directory also has addresses. And this is where we're going to talk more specifically about GOAT. So GOAT is an online tool that city planning produces where it takes addresses and really starts to show you how all those connect with all these other identifiers we talked about, even some more that we're going to talk about soon. So here I searched for 30 West 8th Street in Manhattan, which was the entrance to Stumptown. But you'll notice that it gives me address ranges. It's saying that, in fact, the underlying tax lot, BBL, of GOAT, in fact, of this address, I'm sorry, in GOAT, which references the property address database, is showing 3 bins. The bin here of 114, bin 112, and bin 113. And in those bins, bin 114 has 2 addresses. It has West 8th Street and 182. And then we finally bin this 113, where our 180 address is. It has a low address of 178, high address of 180. So it's telling us a range of possible addresses. Now, DeWitt's property address point may not have identified that as an entrance. And in fact, if you've ever been in that coffee shop, you know that it's like some sort of side entrance. It's unclear where that goes. But this is, again, trying to make you realize that addresses aren't as easy as you might first assume. You might see addresses that then aren't necessarily in DeWitt's address point database, but that those addresses exist in ranges. And bins, as I said at the beginning, the bin was created to sort of merge different addresses together and saying this building has access to these addresses. And this is what you're seeing here. You're saying, here's a bin, here are the range of addresses applicable to that bin on that street name. So addresses are in fact just a collection of information used to give the location of a building, apartment, and other structured plot of land. In the United States, we think of addresses as fairly structured because, going back to the history from Jefferson, we sort of were able to create a sort of structured way of thinking about our land early on. But in other countries, sometimes it's completely off the wall and an entirely different system and reference. And so in fact, reminding yourself that addresses aren't as structured as you might think is really helpful in thinking about all this data and what you're going to see in terms of addresses, that it's a lot more gray than you might think. Now, how are addresses created? How do we generate more of them? So actually, addresses are maintained by each borough president's office. There's a topographic office in each of those borough office, in those offices, and they send us letters. This is a letter from the Manhattan Borough Office saying that 100 West Street, so near World Trade Center, it is for a building located between West and Liberty Street and University, et cetera, et cetera. This is the Queens top borough sending us another letter with the block and lot identified and the address given. So we get those letters and we integrate those into the PAD database. That's the functioning of how we get new addresses. Now the borough offices can do fun things. They can rename streets. They can give these sort of these local law street designations for famous people we want to remember. But this gets complicated on the geocoding side of things. So if you notice, we have West 125th Street up to the top left. We have East 125th Street on the bottom right, but we only have one Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. What that means is there are actually one Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard addresses. And I should have so this is what I've been talking about for a little while, GOAT, and I wanted to show to you. Let's do one Martin Luther King Boulevard. And if I ask GOAT what that is, it's going to tell me, do you want the east or do you want the west version of that, that location? Another surprise in address data, and this is something that, again, boroughs can do, is give what are called vanity addresses. So what you're looking at are all the addresses that end in Penn Plaza, Penn Station. So you got like 16 Penn Plaza up there, you've got 7 Penn Plaza down here, you got 1 Penn Plaza, you got 14 Penn Plaza. And that happens in other sort of, like fancy addresses like Fifth Avenue or Park Place or whatever, where you might be on a side street, but you're given 5 parking spaces, whatever it may be. So, again, it's not as structured and as rational as you might think. Another nice surprise, and this is just a nicety, is that we have these things that we call sort of complexes, where, like Central Park, where there might be a street name, but in the data, in the geocoder, you could also just look for it in Central Park, or here this is Governor's Island. So there are street names like Enright Road, but if you look for 656 Governor's Island in CAD and in GOAT, it would find you the correct location. And we also have some real big landmarks in New York City, like Yankee Stadium, City Hall, Guggenheim, are all addressed in the city's data. Okay, let's see the time. So we've talked about buildings, so you know now that like that skywalk up there has a bin, you know that there are BBLs, and there might be more than one address for this one bin of these buildings on the street. But what about the street itself? How do we identify that? How do we create and merge data to the street bed itself? So there are two types of street IDs, or two primary types. A lot of those, two primary types. One called a segment ID, which is older and more common. You're going to see it a little bit more in the open data. And one's called a physical ID, which is newer, and it's actually a composite of one or more segment IDs. And I'll show you why that's the case. And these are primarily maintained by city planning. The two fundamental data sets for that are the citywide street center line, which is a do it data product, and that uses the physical ID, and is actually a subset of the New York City data product called the Linear Integrated Order Network, or LION. Really like animals, like goats and lions. And it has actually both the segment ID and the physical ID. And so one row in LION, you would actually find, might have several different segment IDs with the same physical ID. Right? Again, physical ID has one or more segment IDs. And what is that? What does that mean? Okay, so here, this is near Gramercy Park on East 20th Street. This black line you see in the middle is the line, the border of a community district. The red line is a physical ID. And the physical ID is basically between one intersection and another intersection. And it's going to give you an ID, so 31993. The segment ID, and I don't yet fully know the history of this, is actually segmented both by intersections, but also by administrative boundaries. So, the line between the intersection here and the first part of the black line is one segment ID. The whole little section just of the black line on East 20th Street is another segment ID, and then from that, all the way to the next intersection is another segment ID. So this physical ID of 31993 is actually a composite of 3 segment IDs. Segment IDs get really tricky because they're versioned. So, when things change and we split a segment ID, the two new segment IDs, I can't tell you what those are. There's no system for me to predict what they might be. The only way is to look at a difference file or to get the latest LION data set. So this becomes very, very important when you're looking at data that has segment IDs to know when that segment ID was tracked. If you're looking at traffic counts from 2016 with segment IDs, you're going to look for 2016 segment ID data. And it's probably a whole other conversation in the section on just like the difference file and different all that. So some of the data sets that are really great to join to segment IDs, physical IDs, are things like street pavement ratings. So it's DOT's tracking of the quality of a street. They use segment IDs with sort of a year version. Street construction permits. So it's DOT's telling you that you're allowed to rip up the street or work on at least a subsection of the street, manholes, that kind of thing. There's a tool called NYC Streets where you can visualize all of that. Plow NYC, which is super fun and really relevant this morning. They use physical IDs, so you can see. And I wanted to, because it has snowed, show you here. So this is just their last cut, right? So this is 4 a.m. This one? No. And the physical ID here, they've got, if you haven't seen it yet, this great little plow NYC website, where you can see when the street was last plowed. This is using physical IDs. Traffic counts, as I mentioned. DOT traffic counts, you can find that open data. In that, you're going to have to look at the when that traffic count was made to understand what version you should be using. So, we got maybe 15 for Q&A. Recap. Now you know there's a BBL of which one or more bins are inside of it. In a bin, there are one or more or a range of addresses. For streets, you have segment IDs that make up broken by added boundaries. You have physical IDs that go from one physical intersection to the next physical intersection, and hopefully maybe understand a little more about all the unique identifiers in your city space. All right, questions now, yeah.
Well, I just remind people that the GOAT manual is online, and it is an 800-plus page joy and love, where you can find out what happens when 5 streets intersect and how to actually translate that as an address.
And there's a wealth of information in GOAT, and also even other identifiers that I'd love to cover one day, like block face identifiers. So how do you know if you're on the right side? So if I'm looking at a physical ID, but I want to reference the right side of this building, or the left side of this building. Get some more detail.
Hi, I'm going to Pluto map data, but I'm curious if there's a way, are there identifiers, like if you wanted to find all of the greenhouses in New York, is there a way to, is there a code or something that
I wish, so full disclosure, I did the research for this because I was interested with my colleagues. I have colleagues that would know exactly the answer. I'm not sure. It would be looking at bins and seeing if there's a bin type, which I think there is, but I'm not sure that it goes as granular as, but in Map Pluto, you're not getting bins.
Right, yeah.
So you're gonna have to look at, either building footprints, the do its building footprints. Oh, we got an answer here.
Let me interject. Oh, are you familiar with DOF?
I do some stuff with DOF. A lot of it's under building code in Map Pluto. So you know, like A1, all the A's are residential, and there's like 10 types of residential, and like R's are like condos.
Yeah.
So if you go through the building codes in Map Pluto, there's a lot of that information attached to.
But the challenge in that is that if it is a lot with a building and a greenhouse, Map Pluto based on a lot, it may be giving you the building type of the larger building and not the greenhouse.
Yeah, you're right.
So this is where Map Pluto's building information comes with a massive caveat.
So I want to highlight DOIT's building footprints. I don't know about greenhouses in particular, but there is a field that identifies the type of building. And I know right now there's only a few types, and I don't think greenhouse is one of them, but DOIT is expanding that to include, like, you know, this is a gas station canopy and stuff like that.
So would it include, if you had either a residential or an industrial building and there was a greenhouse on top of it, would that greenhouse on top get its own bin?
Yeah.
It would, that's what I was kidding.
Yeah. So actually even after I think it was a Legionnaire's disease, there was this issue. Cooling towers. So actually cooling towers on top of skyscrapers now also have their own bin. Because what happened is that city officials have found it as a very useful identifier for these kinds of questions. And so it's grown to be more of an identifier of built structures than just buildings.
But at the moment, there's no code to describe the bin type, like there's no code.
But I'm not sure. I assume there is, but I'm not sure.
Zoning lots? Is there any identifier for zoning lots that consist of more, like multiple tax lots? So like air rights from a building, you enter into an agreement.
What I didn't even get into is that actually air rights have bins.
Why?
We could do a whole section.
And I'm not actually qualified to even talk about like, how that works. So I just know they exist, and that's for next year's School of Data.
Yeah, just like probably for Cindy, like remind me, and you might have mentioned it, why can a building have multiple bins?
Why can't a building have
Why
multiple?
do they?
Oh, why do they?
And then,
So in most cases, the bin is unique, but there are exceptions where a bin has been reused. So let me go back to the definition of a bin. I like to think of it as a social security number. You're not going to give my social security number to another person. Unfortunately, there are some cases where that happens with bins in New York City. And one of the biggest use cases for that situation that we found is there are limitations on legacy databases that DOB uses, and I think there's some problem on DCP too. We're currently working to sync up our systems and fix this, where we can't have two buildings with the same address in the system. So here's a concrete example. A construction professional comes and they have an existing building that they're going to demolish. They want to build a new building on that lot, but they're not going to tear down that existing building until they know that Department of Buildings approves their application for that new building, because they're making money on this building. They don't want to destroy it until they know they can build that new building. So they'll submit both applications at the same time, and our system can't handle two unique identifiers for that same address. So what we've done is to use that existing bin for both the demolition and the new building application. While this construction job goes through the process, both have the same bin. Once all of that work is done, it's demolished, the new building is built, we're supposed to create a new bin for that new building. So it makes things messy, and we're working on trying to fix that problem.
So the bin, as you mentioned before, has 7 pages, right? The first one is for the borough, and the remaining 6 are for the building.
Right.
That's only 1 million numbers per borough. We're running out, and the answer is yes. Is there already a plan for a new paradigm?
That's a really good, as far as I understand, we're not.
Already a million buildings in
Well, buildings and a bunch of other things too.
Yeah.
Right, all this country. I hadn't heard that concern when I was talking to my colleagues. Maybe but I didn't hear that. But that's a really cool question.
What was the question again?
If we're going to run out of bins because we have 6.
Yeah, I've had that concern myself, but I'm reassured by other people that it's not a concern, so
Do you know how many we have right now in Manhattan, for example?
not off the top of my head.
Hi. What exactly is an apportionment BBL?
What is that?
What exactly is an apportionment BBL?
Apportionment? I have no idea.
All right.
We need Department of Finance in here to answer that question.
Well, they're in Pluto, so
Yeah.
I was curious in terms of like, this is really fascinating. What is like the Q&A portion of this in like real life? What is resources be kind of like? Is it just following you on Twitter, or like how do I learn all this knowledge?
Resources here. So there's actually really, Do It does a fantastic job with their GIS metadata. They also have, their GIS team has a blog that gives really, really good overview. And then a developer, a software developer on there wrote this post a little while ago that's also a really good overview of the data, as well as, there's a ton of, as mentioned, the documentation on Go, the documentation on PAD, all the metadata in Open Data itself is itself the resource to go to.
I would also interject that on the Open Data portal, there's a contact us link at the top. And both DCP and DOB are directly connected to that contact us, so you can submit questions and we will answer them. Please don't overload us, because this is not our full-time job to do this, but we're happy to answer questions.
This is going to be all the presentation is going to be up.
I hope so. I'll talk to BetaNYC.
So if you were trying to find all of the demolished buildings, or how many buildings were demolished in the Bronx in the last 10 years? Would there be duplicates with buildings that are existing? Would you be able to do that at all?
I would suggest if you wanted a list of all the buildings demolished in the last 10 years, that you look at DOB's job application filings data set, because that will have a unique ID for the job.
Okay.
And it'll be tied to bin at the time, whether it was the demo bin or the new bin or whatever it was. But the job is unique.
And that's all successful jobs, right?
That's all jobs that are submitted. So there are jobs in the job application filings data set that never get finished.
I don't know if you have the perspective to talk about this, but how does this system of identifiers vary importantly from like common systems for municipalities across the rest of the country?
I wish I could answer that. I mean, I think the block and lot system is very North American, or perhaps global. But the bin, I'm not sure. I mean, bin is a New York City creation. I don't know others. I'm sure other cities have done similar things. But
Yeah, there's also a federal bin, but that's a bridge identification number.
Just a question. Is there anything on the horizon for the next generation of this? Any new technology that's being looked at for, using some AI to improve building identification, using fuzzy matching, anything like that?
So I think the first thing is just the challenge of interagency coordination. It's actually, we're not even talking AI, we're just talking about better pipelines between, and that's being worked on. That is, I think, the step we're at the moment. I mean, it's a really good question, and I guess also in this session what I want to sort of convey is, as much as if we could start from scratch, a lot of us technically know we would approach it differently, but the fact that we already have a BBL and bin is massive compared to, I've talked to colleagues in London, where they don't have a BBL. London it's managed by boroughs, and they have some 30-something boroughs, and each borough has its own planning commission and has its own way of maintaining this data. So you think about New York City as an older city, relatively, at least North America. We're already quite ahead in terms of these fundamental identifiers than even other places. So that's where our level is. I mean, and really, next, if you think about new technology, it's just improving the way that these things are built. So like I have a colleague who's now open sourced the entire way that map Pluto is generated, and so you can at least see in the innards of how these joins happen. That's where we're at.
Yeah, and to add to that, both DCP and DOB are upgrading our legacy database systems. So we're trying to upgrade the back end. It's not as advanced as what you're talking about with like AI and machine learning and all that, but we're getting there. And I know at DOB we're trying to implement some of that stuff internally as much as we can with the systems that we're stuck with.
Is there any interagency task force that's actually
Yeah, we don't want to slow down the process by involving the entire city. So currently, it's just DOB and DCP, and we're making.
Got it. Can you let people know about CUSP and other things if they care about this sort of thing? There are graduate programs at CUNY, at Columbia, at NYU that really go into this kind of stuff.
Yeah, NYU CUSP, Columbia, CUNY, all these places that you mentioned. There's a lot of classes out there you can take. There's a lot of great professors who are teaching this stuff. BetaNYC has run some classes even. So there's a lot of resources out there.
You both are targeting hire people from CUSP, as well as other programs.
Yes, yeah, we look at graduates in these programs when we're hiring. It's absolutely, if you're looking for an avenue to get involved with this, please do look at all of those universities.
So on that, about the technology, so you're in charge of the commission for terraforming Mars, and you have to do like this again, but what is the system that you like, or are you seeing that in the world that you had, like we were doing a brand new system?
Oh man.
Not on the spot. You need like a couple hours. It's like, 7 days, maybe the Terraform Mars.
Well, I'll start. I love the bin, I honestly do, and I think I would keep it, but I would make sure that there are data governance practices around it to make sure that it's unique. Do you have anything?
I really should think about this, it's a great question. I mean, you think that if you could start over, you'd have a UUID, it doesn't matter, you'd like hash given the identifier in it, and you just, so every piece of infrastructure would have some sort of hash that you could then subdivide. I don't know, that's 30 seconds. You think about it, 30 seconds.
That's fine.
If there's any other question, one last thing. If you are interested in this, we are hiring in the tech teams at City Planning. I don't know if you've heard of Planning Labs, we'll talk about that a little bit more at 3 o'clock today. To know more about these jobs, go to medium.com, NYC Planning-digital. We're looking for a data engineer who's going to work on really fundamental a lot of these problems, as well as a full stack developer and interaction designer that works on sort of consuming that and making all of what you just saw more understandable for an analyst as they make their way through and connect this information and come to decisions. So I think these are new jobs. So if you're interested, go here, talk to me, and enjoy lunch.